Prices rise at their fastest rate for 30 years, driven by high increases in petrol and diesel costs. Fuel and food prices have pushed the UK inflation rate to 7% in the year to March. That's the highest since 1992. Business owners say they're feeling the pinch.
It just seems to be getting worse right now. You know, over the last sort of month, 2 months, things have increasingly got worse.
Boris Johnson is defended by cabinet colleagues after being fined for breaking COVID laws, but a former Tory party leader in Scotland says he should resign.
Here in Ukraine, terrible conditions in the besieged city of Mariupol, with as many as 120,000 people trapped for weeks. Russia's stranglehold tightens. Humanitarian corridors for civilians to escape remain blocked. Uncovering war crimes, President Biden says Russia is committing genocide. We follow prosecutors looking for evidence.
The challenge for prosecutors will be to establish a line of command from the grave to the top of the Russian state, to show that crimes are not just committed, but ordered.
The murder of the MP Sir David Amess. His killer is given a whole life sentence after tricking his way into a constituency surgery. And house builders pledged to pay to remove unsafe cladding from medium and high buildings which they've worked on.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Manchester City take a 1-goal lead to Madrid as they prepare to face Spanish champions Atletico in the quarter-finals of the Champions League.
Good evening. Prices are going up at the fastest rate for 30 years, driven by a sharp rise in the cost of petrol and diesel. The inflation rate, which measures how much prices are increasing, rose to 7% in the year to March. That's up from 6.2% in February. Inflation is now at the highest it's been since 1992, and the cost of living is set to keep going up in the coming months as the rise in the cap on energy prices takes effect, increasing gas and electricity bills for millions. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity has the details.
Table 14, please.
In this restaurant kitchen in Eccles in Greater Manchester, global price pressures are feeding through to your pizza. The flour that makes the dough has gone up, partly because Russia and Ukraine are among the world's biggest wheat exporters. They're also big exporters of cooking oil.
Vegetable oil has been a massive one for us. It's gone up to sort of £22 in the last year. A lot of that's been recent, and whether or not that's to do with like what's going on in Ukraine, but there is a shortage. We're only allowed to buy sort of 3 barrels at a time. Anything that seems to be imported, like tomatoes, have gone up £7 or £8 a case. Like mozzarella, about £2 a bag. Everything's going up, and we've not increased the price of a pizza yet. Right, we have to. There's no other way around it. Everything's sort of against you at the minute. You know, VAT going back to 20%. There is sort of like it's stacking up. I think a lot of people will struggle.
Businesses like this one are already facing inflation at its highest for 30 years, and this month they've got a quadruple whammy: higher interest rates, higher wages, higher national insurance and soaring energy bills. With that kind of cost pressure, they've got no choice but to pass it on to their customers.
Those customers are already feeling the squeeze from other costs.
Increased petrol is something we've noticed.
Heating. So we had our first updated bill this month. So we've gone from paying £120 a month to £360 a month.
But like going around, like making sure like lights are turned off when you're not in the room, and we've like never lived like that.
That underlines a key point. The upward pressure on prices is global. In Europe this month, they're expecting inflation of 7.5%. In the US, inflation's reached a 40-year high of 8.5%, and the official Russian inflation figure is 12.5%. In the UK, consumers can expect price rises to accelerate.
The April inflation number is likely to be even higher. It could well be around 9% when we get the April inflation report next month. So that it points to a further squeeze on living standards, and it's not going away anytime soon.
With raw materials prices overheating globally, there's little the Bank of England can do to cool them by raising interest rates in the UK alone. Most economists think this worldwide surge in the cost of living will get worse before it gets better. Andy Verity, BBC News.
The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has defended Boris Johnson, who yesterday became the first sitting Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law. Mr Shapps said that Mr Johnson hadn't acted with malice or intent. But the former Scottish Conservative Party leader, Ruth Davidson, was highly critical, saying the Prime Minister should walk. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young.
He's broken the law and his own strict COVID rules. Boris Johnson forced to apologise again and again for lockdown partying in Downing Street.
I want to begin by repeating my apologies.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise.
I once again offer a full apology.
But is saying sorry enough to save his job? For now, Cabinet colleagues think so.
It's not defensible, and he has paid that fixed penalty notice. The question, I suppose, in my mind is, as individuals, none of us are perfect. No one does, we all are. We're all human. The question in my mind, therefore, is, did he set out with malice to break the law? Answer, no.
In June 2020, when rules were being broken in Downing Street, the UK was in lockdown. Ken and Ian Blackmore lost their newborn daughter that month when she was 4 days old. COVID restrictions kept the family apart.
To know that through that time, when we were literally only getting a section of time with our baby girl, knowing she was going to die, and there's people having parties, and who made the rules? They're the ones who put that in place, and we're not the only people that lost somebody.
Conservative MPs insist they understand the public anger, but say ousting the Prime Minister when there's a war in Ukraine would be wrong. Liberal Democrats said he wasn't a decent man, and the SNP condemned a culture of entitlement in Downing Street. Labour piled in too.
The idea that we can't change leadership now because of the war in Ukraine or because of the economic crisis, I think it's actually the other way round. That actually we need fresh leadership, and we need leaders who can concentrate on the job in hand, which is tackling Russian aggression and supporting Ukraine, and also here at home tackling the cost of living crisis.
Very few Conservatives are publicly criticising Mr Johnson. One of his fiercest critics, the Scottish leader Douglas Ross, has retracted his call for him to go. But a colleague disagrees.
I think that the Prime Minister should walk now because, one, he's been shown to have broken the laws of the land that he himself set, because he presided over a culture in Number 10 where there was persistent law breaking, and because he went and told both the Parliament and the country that no laws had been broken when they clearly had been, and he knew that they had been.
Mr Johnson's safe in Number 10 for now, but the police investigation is far from over.
Vicky is in Westminster for us now. Vicky, the Prime Minister has been damaged, perhaps very damaged, by these revelations that he broke the law over lockdown, but he's under a lot of pressure over the cost of living too.
Yeah, he is, and I think any Conservative MPs out campaigning for those May elections in the coming weeks are going to get some rather difficult feedback on the doorstep. Now, I pose the question there, is saying sorry enough for people when it came to the rule breaking in Downing Street? Well, tonight I can tell you it hasn't been enough for one Justice Minister. That is Lord David Wolfson. He has resigned, becoming the first minister to resign over what's become known as Partygate. And he's not happy with Boris Johnson at all. He says it's not just a question of what happened in Downing Street or your own conduct. It is also, and perhaps more so, the official response to what took place. Now, there hasn't been much public dissent heading towards Boris Johnson from his own MPs, but I can tell you ministers and MPs have told me that they do think eventually he's going to have to go, and certainly the possibility with this police investigation ongoing that there will be more fines, that could be a real problem for him.
Vicky, many thanks. Vicky Young reporting. Well, students and graduates in England are facing high charges on their loans in the immediate future, with interest rates of up to 12%, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It says that student loans will be subject to what it calls a rollercoaster of rates over the next couple of years, and that rates will dip next March after a cap kicks in. Well, our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, is here with me. What's going on here, Branwen?
Well, the interest you pay on your student loan is linked to a measure of the cost of living called the Retail Price Index. So while you're at university, it's that RPI plus 3%. And when you graduate, that's the maximum you could pay, depending on how much you earn. So let's have a look at the next few years. From the current 4.5%, it leaps up to 12%. Before then, 6 months later, it drops back down to 7%, bobbles along at that kind of level until 2024, when it drops down to 0 and then bumps up again. Now, the economists at the Institute for Fiscal Studies say the government could level out this roller coaster of interest rates. It's not that these short-term fluctuations will have much impact on how much you pay. The loans are repaid over 30 years, so it's a small effect. The concern is some of these headline figures could put people off going to university. Now, the government told us today the system it believes is fair to students and to graduates. When you leave university, how much you pay and the interest rates are linked to how much you earn.
Branwen, many thanks. Branwen Jeffries reporting there. Well, there'll be more from me shortly, but now with the latest on the war in Ukraine, I hand you to my colleague Clive Myrie in Kyiv. Clive.
Reeta, many thanks for that. Russia is claiming more than 1,000 Ukrainian troops have surrendered in the besieged southern city of Mariupol, but the government here says it's still in control. The city has been encircled by Russian troops for weeks now, and while they've been slowly pushing towards the center, they faced stiff resistance. But it's unclear how much longer the Ukrainian forces can hold on. Gaining full control of Mariupol would be a major win for Moscow, creating a land bridge between Crimea, which Russia illegally annexed in 2014, and areas held by Russian-led separatists in the Donbass region. It would enable thousands of troops to be deployed to the east for a new offensive planned there. But caught in the middle is Mariupol. Its mayor says around 21,000 civilians have been killed and 120,000 are trapped in the city. Our correspondent Tom Bateman reports now from the city of Zaporizhia, where some people displaced from Mariupol have ended up. A warning, his report contains upsetting images.
This is a city reduced to darkness and death. Russia's troops now occupy the theatre that was bombed as hundreds sheltered. Their 6-week siege of Mariupol has brought it to the brink of falling. State TV in Moscow showed these unverified pictures, claiming they are Ukrainian soldiers surrendering. But the city's defenders posted their own videos holed up in the port and a factory, still fighting, but their position seems desperate. We won't give up, says this Marine, but we're encircled with no resupply of ammunition or food. 100 miles north, just over the Russian line, Europe's 21st century war is fought amid mud and rage in the trenches. Mariupol's capture could see a push north here. If Mariupol falls, what will happen here?
Well, we won't let this place turn into Mariupol. They're holding on.
Vitaly shows me their Soviet-era launchers. They also have brand new Western weapons, but they want more, with the war about to move to a decisive phase.
Well, they're completely dug in here, as you can see, and the Russians are that way, about 4 or 5 miles from here, within artillery range, and you can see how they're ready for a long and grinding fight.
They've been entrenched for 45 days.
We are on our own soil. We expect them to bury as many of them as possible. The more troops they send our way, the more fertile our land gets.
Russia's siege has killed thousands of civilians in Mariupol and unleashed an appalling struggle for survival for residents that remain. And these are the children of President Putin's war. This hospital, north of the front line, is taking patients from Mariupol and, like those in this ward, from elsewhere in the south and east. The doctors tell me they're treating children with injuries they usually see in soldiers straight from the battlefield. For Mariupol's survivors, whole lives are packed into a few bags, and they carry the fresh horrors of this war. Lena and Timothy are homeless, their apartment block obliterated in an airstrike. Ukraine's leaders called Mariupol the heart of their war effort, but they fear soon it could stop beating. Tom Bateman, BBC News, Zaporizhia, in southeast Ukraine.
The continuing pain of Mariupol there. Well, President Biden says the evidence appears to suggest that Russia is committing genocide here in Ukraine. He says it's becoming clearer and clearer that Vladimir Putin wants to wipe out the idea of even being Ukrainian. Over the past 2 weeks, Russian forces have been withdrawing from the north around the capital here after failing to enter Kyiv. Their retreat from the areas shown here in purple has allowed a clearer picture to emerge of the terrible damage and destruction left in their wake. Our correspondent Mark Lowen has visited the towns of Bucha and Borodianka, traveling with those trying to document evidence of war crimes committed by Russian troops. His report contains upsetting details.
10 more. The numbers, the mass graves, the contempt for life. Some so badly charred, they're just the pieces for Ukraine to pick up. The man and the inhuman. What happened here in Bucha and elsewhere are not just sins, says Ukraine, but war crimes. French investigators and other international teams are helping prepare a lawsuit against Russia. Ukraine's Prosecutor General says they've already opened more than 6,000 cases.
A lot of people speak about genocide of Ukrainian people, and actually it have all grounds to speak about genocide. Vladimir Putin himself, he is president of aggressor.
Do you believe you will ever see him judged in an international war crimes court?
It is very important, actually. It's very important to whole world to stop dictators.
The challenge for prosecutors will be to establish a line of command from the grave to the top of the Russian state, to show that crimes were not just committed, but ordered. Perhaps that will help give Ukrainians a sense of accountability, and that from such suffering can come justice. The long road to that goal, past a landscape of horror, is led not just by the state, but by volunteer investigators, a grassroots army fighting for the truth. They come to Borodianka, gutted from the air in a relentless assault, tearing out its heart. Amidst the ruins, banned cluster bombs. The destroyed ground is fertile for the team building their case.
We're trying to tell the world the truth, and we are trying not to let Russia formulate their lying narratives about the war in Ukraine. We are trying to show to people that those war crimes which Russian troops are committing became like a pattern of their behavior.
Among the shattered sea of victims are Oksana Laba and her husband Nikola. They escaped. Their apartment didn't. With the need to tell the story comes the duty to collect it.
Our home was our cozy nest. We were planning our children's birthday here. My mother got out just before the strike. It's hard to describe our terror. It's more like hate. It's very important to say what happened, because these are not just war crimes. Russia will not stop until it destroys our country.
Freedom and safety, What Ukrainians held dear has been destroyed. Their solace now would be punishment for those who have broken this country. Mark Lowen, BBC News, Borodyanka.
Well, we began our Ukraine coverage tonight with the appalling situation in Mariupol, a city subjected to a medieval siege for several weeks now. Incessantly bombed and shelled by Russian forces, it's hard to imagine what will be left for a victor to claim. But following Russia's failure to take the capital here, Mariupol would be a handy prize, linking Russia by land to illegally annexed Crimea. That would be a badly needed win for Vladimir Putin, that he can sell to Russians, no matter the appalling conditions in the city right now, no matter how many people die. That's it from me and the team here in Kyiv. Now back to you, Reeta, in the studio in London.
Many thanks, Clive. Clive Myrie reporting. The time is 6:20, our top story this evening. Prices rise at their fastest rate for 30 years as the UK inflation rate hits 7%, driven by high increases in petrol and diesel costs. And coming up, the manager of Northern Ireland's women's football team, Kenny Shiels, apologises for his comments that female players are more emotional.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, Liverpool look to finish the job against Benfica and seal a spot in the Champions League semi-finals. Boss Jurgen Klopp says the weekend's big FA Cup tie won't affect which team he picks tonight.
Deal has been reached between the government and dozens of developers for repairs to be carried out on medium and high-rise residential buildings which have dangerous cladding. It's thought about 500,000 homeowners are living in unsafe properties with flammable cladding and other fire safety defects. It comes nearly 5 years after the Grenfell Tower fire in London, in which 72 people died. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz has the latest.
Shrouded in wrap, this building in Manchester is on its way to being made fire safe. Work started before it was clear who'd pay. Now the company which built it, Bellway, has said it'll pick up the bill, one of more than 30 developers to sign a government pledge. For those living here, like the Webbs, it's a big relief, though they say they can't quite believe it yet.
Once I get a letter from Bellway saying, Colin and Anne, don't worry, we're going to cover everything, then I will be dancing around this room and jumping on the balcony, but I can't do that because we're not allowed out on the balconies.
Yeah, I think it's been going on for such a long time now that the relief has to be a very cautious relief, really.
The new agreement only covers buildings which are taller than 11 metres, and it's currently voluntary, although it will become legally enforceable. There are still eligible developers who haven't signed the pledge, and the government says that if they don't, they could be banned from new construction. And people living in buildings whose developers can't be traced say they think it'll take longer and be more complicated to sort things out.
As you come through here, you can see the scaffolding.
You can't miss it. Sally Ann Dove lives in a building which is also having its unsafe cladding replaced, but the developer hasn't signed the new agreement and her costs are still mounting.
It's not something for me to be over the moon about because I'm still in limbo. I still technically owe thousands and nearly £100,000. I get an invoice currently for £13,500 every quarter, and that should be paid within 30 days.
Can you afford it?
No, I don't think anyone can afford that kind of money.
The scheme will include funds for work done on buildings whose developers can't be traced. It'll come from an industry-wide levy charged on new residential buildings in England.
Where we find this unfair is the proposal that we should pay for everybody else's buildings. We built a minority of these buildings, overseas developers, commercial companies, other developers that have since gone bust, built the rest. And Mr Gave is proposing raising a further £3 billion over 10 years, not just from the larger builders, but also on every home that's built.
The government says that today's announcement is just the first phase, involving the UK's largest house builders, and it'll continue to pursue all those responsible. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
More than 250 people have died in South Africa's worst floods for 60 years. Hillsides have been washed away, homes have collapsed and dozens of people are still missing in the KwaZulu-Natal province. The country's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's visiting some of the worst affected areas, described the situation as a catastrophe of enormous proportions. Shipping at Durban, South Africa's busiest port, has been suspended. The man who murdered the Conservative MP Sir David Amess in Essex last year will spend the rest of his life in prison after being sentenced to a whole life term. Sir David's family said there was no elation following the killer's sentencing and that they would struggle through each day for the rest of their lives. Our Home Affairs correspondent Dominic Casciani reports now from the Old Bailey.
A crime that shocked a town, the murder of an MP in this church in Leigh-on-Sea. A crime that united the political world and the country, all wanting justice for Sir David Amess and his grieving family. Today, that day of reckoning at the Old Bailey, where Ali Harbi Ali, a self-confessed terrorist, would learn his fate. During the trial, he'd used the witness box to spout Islamic State propaganda. Today, his defence barrister told the court he had instructed her to say nothing at all. But Mr. Justice Sweeney had plenty to say. The defendant has no remorse or shame for what he's done, said the judge. Quite the reverse. Sir David's loss is one of national significance. When it came to sentence, there was no doubt in Mr. Justice Sweeney's mind. Ali Harbi Ali had carefully prepared a murder of a public servant for a terrorist cause, an attack that struck at the very heart of democracy. And that meant he crossed the legal line for a whole life order. He will never get out of jail. No sense of victory in the family statement read by the head of counter-terrorism.
There is no elation in our family today following this sentencing. Our amazing husband and father has been taken from us in an appalling and violent manner. Nothing will ever compensate for that.
The grief of a family and a community triggered a national debate. How open should MPs be in an age of terrorism? Today, a former MP and family friend said Sir David was a man who loved to perform his public duty.
I don't think David would have wanted this in his name to result in any undue distancing of MPs from their constituents. He was a man who wanted to meet his constituents.
Sir David's family said it breaks their heart that he would have greeted the murderer with a smile. A killer who left court today, knowing he will die in jail. Well, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, Reeta, he tonight said that his desire to strengthen the security of MPs was greater than before. We know spending is up. We know that many MPs have installed panic alarms. Mike Freer, one of the MPs targeted by Ali Harbi Ali, he says his staff now wear stab vests. That's a sense of the concern. But there are questions too about how far that security can go. Perhaps ones that the coroner can answer if there is going to be an inquest into the death of Sir David Amess. That we're waiting to find out whether that will go ahead. Back to you, Reeta.
OK, Dominic, thank you. The Scottish Liberal Democrats have launched their manifesto for next month's council elections with a pledge to channel extra powers to local authorities. Leader Alex Cole-Hamilton said too many policies were set by central government ministers who are far from the consequences of their decisions. The party wants to give councillors more control over funding, transport, planning, energy and housing. The manager of Northern Ireland's women's football team, Kenny Shiels, has been strongly criticised for his claim that female teams concede goals in clusters because they're more emotional than men. His comments, for which he has apologised, came after a 5-0 defeat to England, which left his side unable to qualify for next year's Women's World Cup. Joe Curry has more.
In just a few words, Kenny Shiels undermined decades of progress. It was supposed to be a night for making strides forward, with the biggest crowd for a women's match in Northern Ireland. Instead, it was a claim from the team's manager that put him in the spotlight.
In the women's game, when a team concedes a goal, they concede a second one within a very short period of time, because girls and women are more emotional than men, so they take a goal gun in, they don't take that very well.
Shiels was speaking after a heavy defeat to England ended their hopes of making the World Cup. In apologising today, he said he was proud to manage a group of players who are role models for so many girls and boys across the country, adding he was an advocate for the women's game and passionate about developing opportunities for women and girls to flourish. But the reaction to his remarks has been understandably strong.
They're such outdated views to stereotype like that. So the comments are damaging because people will just take what they read and that's their perception and therefore that's their reality. The fact is the women's game's come a long way.
It's not only women who've taken exception to the comments. Former England striker Ian Wright tweeted, "Kenny Shields talking foolishness, talking about emotional women. Didn't that man see how many times I was crying on the pitch?" England and Northern Ireland are miles apart in terms of investment and development. But Shields has led his side to this summer's Euros, their first major tournament, and he'll be hoping it's that's remembered. Jo Curry, BBC News.
Let's catch up with the weather now. Here's Stav Denial. Stav.
Thanks very much, Rita. Good afternoon to you. It's not been a bad day today for many of us. A much better day, in fact, across the north of the UK compared to yesterday. And the run-up to to Easter looks like it's going to stay pretty warm with some sunshine around, but there will be increasing chance of rain through the Easter weekend. We've had some showers as well through parts of England and Wales. Some of these have been quite heavy, but they're fizzling out. And through this evening and overnight, it'll be dry for most of us. We'll start to see some low cloud mist and murk running into southern and western areas as we head through the early hours there. Nowhere's going to be particularly cold at lows of 6 to 9 degrees, actually pretty mild. So we start off on a mild note, fairly humid note into tomorrow. But we will have a little bit of rain for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland. That really is about it. I think fewer showers for England and Wales tomorrow than what we've had today. And we'll see the sunshine breaking through that cloud, although parts of Scotland could stay rather grey. Top temperatures again around the 20 Celsius mark across southern areas, but even further north, the mid-teens in Celsius. That's a little above the seasonal norm. As we head through Thursday night, again, most places will be dry. Any showers will tend to fade away. Thicker cloud out towards the south and the west. Again, there will be some low cloud and murk around some southern and western coasts. And again, a mild night to come, probably even milder. So that takes us into Good Friday, which could potentially be the warmest day of the week. Plenty of sunshine through central and eastern areas. That'll bump temperatures up, perhaps into 21, maybe 22 degrees in a couple of spots. Further west, there will be a bit more cloud around, just 1 or 2 showers for Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. But again, many places should stay dry, and it's going to be a warmer day for Scotland as well. As we head deeper into the Easter weekend, although many places will stay warm and dry the further east that you are, further west we could start to see some weather fronts pushing in, certainly Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, and that could introduce a little bit of rainfall. So you have to stay tuned to the forecast. That's it from me, Rita.
Thank you, Stav. Well, that is all from BBC News at 6. So it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.